Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining. We will get started promptly at 11 o'clock. So just enjoy a little bit of quiet time and we'll get started shortly. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. We will get started momentarily as we wait for a few more folks to be joining us.
We will get started momentarily.
Hi, everyone, and welcome this great Monday, still morning here in Washington. So happy that you've all been able to join us to this We Got This WA webinar series that the Seattle Chamber of Commerce in partnership with Business Health Trust will be producing. This is the first of this series, so be on the lookout for additional ones as we continue to aim to provide real-time resources to employers and employees affected by the current COVID-19 pandemic here in Washington. I wanted to give a special thank you to the Chamber for putting this together. They have been one of the first organizations who were very vocal about the need for changes in unemployment security during this time. Also wanted to thank our sponsor who is making this possible, which is Advanced Professionals Insurance and Benefit Solutions. They are a great team of people that help support the Chamber's Association Health Plan. So if you're an employer from 1 to 200 employees, you could get access to 50 plus choices of great health insurance options through that program. We will get started now. Looks like we have over 350 people joining us right now and growing. A few logistical items to talk about first. Everyone is muted right now due to the large volume of people on the call. If you have questions that you are hoping to get answered, please go to the chat function, the Q&A button, and you can enter a question. During the webinar, there will be several people either responding directly, or we will try to address as many questions as possible in the conversation between myself and Chris Bowen from Employment Security. We will be making the slides available and a few additional resources after this webinar completes, and that will be sent out by the Chamber team to the emails that you registered with. If we're not able to get to all questions, we will continue to work to get resources and answers to those questions after this webinar is completed. So please continue to send those questions in, and we can send that out. I just saw a comment that you cannot see us. You should only be able to see a shared webinar screen. It has a picture of Washington State that says "We Got This WA" webinar series. We'll be going through that, and we will not have any video component for speakers for this, this presentation. With that, I wanted to introduce Chris Bowen from Employment Security Department, have her say a little bit about herself, and then I will kind of go over our overview of things we're hoping you accomplish in and learn in this webinar, and she'll start to answer a few questions. Chris, do you want to introduce yourself?
Good morning. My name is Chris Bowen, and I am lead policy analyst for Employment Security Department. I work in the policy unit here. I've been with the agency for almost 20 years now. I had just started a couple of months before 9/11 happened, so the downturn in economy isn't something that's absolutely new to me, although it's always different each particular time that we do this. At that time, I started off in the Seattle Claims Center as an intake agent taking unemployment claims. I've adjudicated unemployment claims. I've been a trainer. I've been a quality control person, and I've been in the policy unit for the last almost 10 years. My current position as lead policy analyst helps me, it means that I actually help direct the work within our own staff, who does what and answers what questions and things like that. So I'm happy to be here and hope I can answer all of your questions.
Great. Well, thank you again for just your willingness to have a conversation and have almost 400 people listen in as we all try and navigate this new world here. Some of the objectives for this webinar, one is to aid employers and employees to understand what current options Employment Security Department has, specifically as it relates to COVID-19 and the emergency rules that were put out. We're really hoping to get input, or not input, to bring insight as to the current challenges with the system. We know there's a huge volume of unemployment claims being processed right now, and so understand what those challenges are and what is being done to mitigate, as well as best practices to help people go through the process of actually filing and having that be a successful process. Lastly, our objective is to provide an overview of the process and the flow so that employers know what to expect if workers are filing. So with that, Chris, I will turn it over to you. And actually, no, we will do a polling question. So we will open up a poll right now. We are interested in what your role is at your current company, owner or CEO leadership, participate in the HR function, office manager or administrator, or another employee function. We'll leave this open for a few minutes so that we can understand who is on the call and be able to tailor some of our questions and knowledge. Great, and we will close the poll out right now. Thank you. It looks like I will share these results here on the screen. So it looks like we have about 18% in a leadership owner or CEO capacity, participating in the HR function, about a quarter of folks, 11% office manager or administrator, and other employees, 48%. So we will try to target some of the questions that have been coming in to try and address, workers or employees that might be filing right now and have questions around that function as well. Thank you, very helpful. Chris, could you give us a little bit of an overview of the programs that ESD currently offers for full-time and part-time workers with the new emergency rules in place?
Sure. Excuse me. When somebody is separated from work, whether they were a full-time or a part-time worker, they can apply for unemployment benefits. Under the regular guidelines, those who work less than full-time would not be eligible to get standby, which is only a work search waiver. So those people who were part-time, worked less than full-time, they would not normally be eligible for standby. But under the emergency rules, and anybody who works full-time or part-time or anywhere in between can be eligible for standby. That is one of the requirements that we've kind of knocked off in order to be eligible during this time, because we know that many are going to be going back to work with their same employer. The key thing is with standby is you have to be returning to work with your employer. If the employer has to shut down the business permanently or permanently reduce staff, if you were one of those people who are affected by that, you would not be eligible for standby. You have to have a return to work date an expected return to work date. So if you don't, then you would have to be making a job search of 3 contacts each week. We are looking at the information that's coming down from the federal government to find out whether or not some of that can be lessened or in some cases waived, but we haven't gotten that far in analyzing the information that they've sent down. Now, if you were hired as a full-time employee and your work has been reduced, your number of hours have been reduced to no less than 16 hours a week, you could be considered a partially employed worker, and special work search goes along with that. As long as you're working and reporting 16 hours of work and earnings each week, you don't have to look for work if you qualify under this type of separation. If any week that you claim benefits, you report less than 16 hours and earnings, then you would need to start making an active search for work until you returned to full-time work, and then had your hours reduced. It's an alternative for those people who have to just reduce their workforce number of hours as opposed to actually laying people off. It runs along very similarly to shared work, but the shared work is a different program. Employees have to actually have to apply for shared work, and they have certain qualifications that they have to meet in order to be eligible for that. So basically, if you are a shared work employer, you can have at least one of your employees, but as many on there as you want. And basically, if you reduce their hours, they get paid a percentage of their weekly benefit amount that commiserates with the number of hours they were reduced. So for example, let's say somebody works 40 hours and they were reduced to 30. Their work number of hours were reduced by 25%. So they would be eligible for 25% of their weekly benefit amount. That would be more that they would get than if they were filing for regular unemployment and reported 30 hours of work, because there's a different formula that's used to figure out the deduction from the weekly benefit amount. So it is it is nice to have be on the shared work plan. Any employee who is on your shared work plan, they do not have to look for work. So as long as they are on the plan. Now, if somebody is reduced more than 50% who is on the shared work plan, they don't get that special benefit of the deductions for shared work, but they still are eligible for unemployment benefits. So we would revert to the regular deduction amount for the hours that they work and report.
Great. Let me pause you there.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great overview of the three programs. I have some clarifying questions just on each of those three. I'll start with shared work since that was what you were talking about just most recently.
Okay.
So if I understand correctly, shared work would be a great program. Employers need to apply for that in advance before their employees are requesting shared work. Is that correct?
Yes, because they have to have a plan in place before the employees are put on it. Employees can already have existing claims, and then the employer applies for it and is approved. Those claims can be moved onto the shared work, but it would only be from that date forward that they would be on the shared work plan.
Right. And I'm sure a lot of employers haven't used shared work before. Typically, what's the lead time for that process to go through, given right now just the high volume of things?
You know, I really can't speak to that right now because I do know that they've been kind of inundated with applications. So I really don't know what the turnaround time is for them.
Okay. Great, that's helpful. And just a summary of the shared work, that sounds like a program that would be really great for employers who are going to have reduced hours so that their employees are not having to look for work, but are more than 50% employed at this point. Is that
right? And it's good even if they're less than 50% because unlike the partially unemployed, where if they go below 16 hours a week, they're knocked off and then they have to look for work. If you're on a shared work plan, you're on a shared work plan and you don't have to look for work.
Okay.
Okay.
So
Can I give the website for the shared work program?
absolutely.
It is esd.wa.gov/shared work as one word.
And for those of you who didn't catch that, we will send that out in the chat panel, as well as we'll send out all of these links and resources after our webinar. So partial employment. Talk to me about, in layperson's terms, because that's me, what type of employer is best for partial employment? You mentioned, people not dropping below that 16 hours a week.
Basically, anybody who is intending to keep their business running and they're going to have some of their employees that are going to continue to work at least 16 hours. Shared work has a minimum of one person has to be on shared work. You can have as many or as little on the partially employed as you want. It's just that it does require you to have the person work each and every week at least 16 hours.
And is there any sort of minimum percentage of work? If someone was a full-time employee and is now working 17 hours a week or something like that?
Yeah, they have to have been hired as full-time.
Okay.
And their hours cannot be reduced below 16. So that's a 60% reduction of their normal hours.
Yeah, so this program sounds like it's designed for full-time employees that are being reduced no more than below 16 hours a week.
Correct.
Great. So, as we were talking in the shared work, folks that might be dropping below that 50% of their total hours, perhaps this is another program. It's nice to kind of tier them a little bit in my mind right now.
Right. Shared work employees can continue to be waived of work search as long as they're on the plan. So even if their work each week drops below 50%, they're still eligible for unemployment benefits and they still don't have to look for work. Whereas partial employment, you have to look for work once you drop below 16.
Okay. It's an important distinction.
Yes.
So standby, I know I've seen some of the numbers of just the amount of people that are applying for the standby. First, could you tell us some of the challenges with the current system and where I know things are changing very rapidly, but
Mm-hmm.
where that's at, so that we can kind of walk through employers who can communicate to employees of who might have had denials or are having some hiccups in the way. And then we can talk a little bit about what that standby program might provide.
Right. As I was mentioning before, the normal rules are you have to be a full-time employee for that employer in order to be eligible for standby. However, under the emergency rules, you can be a part-time worker or a full-time worker. That doesn't matter. And just added on Friday, both the claimant and the employer can request up to 12 weeks of standby from the date of the request. So I know that part of the problem we had was our computer system was built using the existing rules, the real rules, we should call them. And when we had so many people who were part-time employees applying for standby, the system had no other choice but to go ahead and deny those people who were requesting standby because it was not set up to allow those part-time workers on standby. So what happened over the weekend, as I mentioned, we had another emergency rule go into place allowing up to 12 weeks. The previous requirement was claimants could request up to 4 and employers could request another 4. So over the weekend, we updated our system so that now it will allow claimants who are part-time workers to apply for standby and qualify for standby. And also the time frame allows both claimants and employers to request up to 12 weeks. Any request beyond 12 weeks needs to be a written request from the employer, and that would need to come to policy for us to look at it.
Okay, and so it sounds like over the weekend, these changes were made.
Yes.
What is happening with folks that might have requested previously and gotten a denial? Is there some sort of notification going out?
Yes, that was fixed over the weekend too. So those people who, and I will say in one day, we got almost 10,000 requests for standby that were denied.
Wow.
Obviously we couldn't go in with our original plan and manually change each and every one of those because everybody would still be waiting. So what they did is they did something in the system that pulled all of those that were denied for being part-time and redetermined those to allow. So new letters should be going out today for those people who were previously denied because they were part-time workers, just allowing standby.
Great.
And that just means they don't have to look for work while they're on standby.
Okay. So that was going to be my next question is, do people have to look for work while they are on standby?
No.
And
standby is a waiver of work search.
Okay, great. And so in the online application process, is that something that's being updated right now? Or was updated this weekend? I think at least I heard from a few folks that this weekend it did ask, have you looked for employment for 3 searches?
So when they filed their weekly claim, you mean, not in the application?
Yes.
Yes. So that would be updated as of this weekend as well. So anybody who was previously denied standby was asked the questions, did you make your 3 job search contacts? So until the update happened, they would still be asked that question. Now, if they are approved for standby, it should not even ask a work search question on the weekly claim.
Okay. So it sounds like as those updates are going out to folks, the did you search for work resolves itself.
It should, yes.
Great. I do just want to add a logistical thing in here real quickly. We're seeing some messages that folks are losing audio, but it does sound like using audio through the computer is better right now. So if you're unable to hear, which you might not be able to hear this right now, but Lee did send this in a chat, please try joining using your computer audio right now. Okay, so revisiting standby, kind of my layperson's summary, standby under the emergency rules is available for both part-time and full-time workers. That's not the typical, but in this emergency rule. And if people have applied in the past and gotten denied, that should be fixing itself. Should people still be logging on to file their weekly claims, even if they have a denial that is just for example, having part-time and not qualifying for standby, since that will be fixed?
Yes, we always encourage people to file their weekly claims, even if they have received a letter like that, or they're waiting to file an appeal, or they're not sure yet. File the claim, and anything that comes after that will be taken care of. As far as if you had standby. If you had standby redetermined, then we can go back and fix any work search issues that may have occurred.
Great. Going one level higher, just verifying that the 680-hour eligibility for unemployment overall is still in effect. That has not been
Yes.
changed by emergency rules, correct?
That is correct. You have to have 680 hours in your base year. If you don't qualify in your base year, which is the first 4 quarters of the last 5 completed calendar quarters, if you don't have 680 hours during that time period, then we'll shift it to the last 4 calendar quarters, and some people may end up being eligible with 680 hours there.
Great.
Also, if you worked in any other state than Washington within the last 18 months, you may qualify for a combined wage claim with the other states. So there are some options available for people who haven't always worked in Washington.
Could you talk us through the process of how employers request standby for their employees? And a second question is, since return to work dates keep changing, how might somebody go about changing their return to work date if they only requested 4 weeks and now it will be 8 or 12?
They can submit another request. Basically, if the person has an e-services account, they can go on there and request standby be extended. They can either wait until it's done, their time period is done, and re-request it, or they can go on and ask that their time period be extended, or send in something in writing if they're not an e-services user. Employers, when claimants file their unemployment claim, they're required to report their reason for separation. And every employer will get a request for separation information document. It's a letter. If the employee has said that the reason that they were separated was due to lack of work or laid off, it automatically drops in the standby information for the employer to fill out. Now, if they reported a different reason, like they quit, were fired, or leave of absence, something like that, they won't get that extra drop in. And the employer can do a couple of different things. They can just send us a letter that says they want this person put on standby, or they can go into their own e-services account and go request standby electronically in the account. Now, both of those are individuals. So you're responding to standby for the individuals. That doesn't cover a whole group of people. Now, if you have a group of people that you want to put on standby for specific dates, what we need to have is the name and social security number or a claim ID of those particular employees, and the date that you want standby to start, and the date that you expect that they would probably come back to work. Because we have to have that end date, because remember, you're only allowed up to 12 weeks of standby.
So if somebody has gone in and put in a return to work date, and obviously, those might be changing right now. It sounds like the best way to do that is go back into their e-services account, or call in and to request an extension to that.
Yes.
Great.
Did I answer both of your questions?
I think so.
Okay.
So I'm just looking through our questions right now. Could you define what constitutes standby?
Basically, it's just a work search waiver. Anybody who is put on standby does not have to seek work. And there is more information about standby on our website.
Great, and we can send that out to folks after this as well. So after this webinar, just a reminder, we will be sending around links to the various things that Chris has mentioned and additional resources. Any of the questions that we don't get to, we will also send there. So there's a question, do you send a message to extend your standby date, or can you change that in your weekly claim?
You cannot do it on your weekly claim. There's no question that asks that.
Okay, so they log into their eServices account and go to where?
Oh, see, now you're making me think. I haven't been into eServices for a while, so there should be a tab that allows you to do other tasks, and you can self-request standby there.
Okay, great. And I know I have been through the process helping some employers set up standby. So there is a really great guide on the ESD website, which we will send out after this, that walks you through how you set up a Secure Access Washington account, how you add standby requests, and can do this all electronically by sending in your request there. So I have a question. So we are moving our employees to hourly. Sometimes this could be 40 hours a week, sometimes 10 hours a week due to the consulting work we do. What do you recommend for us to do? Can we move between programs?
And I'm not sure I understand the question, because are you talking about whether they would qualify for shared work or qualify for standby?
Probably, it sounds like, there might be a week that people have full-time employment, but then the next week they go down to 10 hours a week due to lack of work.
Okay. Basically, what would happen is any week that someone reports excess hours or excess earnings, meaning they worked 40 or more hours a week, or they earned more than what would be deducted from their weekly benefit amount, the week that they've requested standby doesn't count against the 12 weeks. So let's say I'm on 12 weeks of standby and I work this week, but I earn, $15. I'm going to make it easy. And I only worked 5 hours. My standby is in place for that week. But next week I'm brought back and I'm working 42 hours and I earned $1,000. That is excess earnings, and it just means that the week of standby that I was already approved for won't get taken out of my pot of weeks. It doesn't,
so it doesn't
automatically move
weeks.
it down the road. It just takes it out of that 12 weeks. So now I have 1 week still sitting in the kitty.
Great.
Does that help?
It does. Okay. So let's talk about the process for employers and employees filing applications for standby work. So starting with employees, an employee can go on to the ESD website and apply for unemployment, create an account, and go through the series of questions. And they can request standby by answering the questions, the reason for filing being, that they were let go due to lack of work. And then that puts them in that standby program if it's approved. Is that correct?
Well, that's not where it happens.
Okay.
The separation is only part of it. They have to report their real reason for separation. And that's, there are a lot of confusing things about the reason for separation, which I think we're going to get to a little bit later. But there's a different screen, a few screens down, that actually asks, do you want to apply for standby? It describes what standby is. It asks, do you want to request standby? If you answer yes, then it'll ask another few questions to determine whether or not you're eligible for standby. And where generally, if you answered you were not full-time or you were not returning to work within the next 12 weeks, then you would be denied. But now that's turned around so that those particular scenarios would be allowed. So it's a totally separate screen where you request standby. It asks you what employer you're going to return to work with, And we're figuring that most of the people are returning to their most recent employer.
Okay. And so employees, as they're filing, can be requesting standby, even if their employer has not put that application in.
The employer doesn't apply for standby.
Okay.
Well, I'm sorry. I think we're using different terms that cross terms here. The employer doesn't file an application for unemployment unless they're requesting shared work, which is a different thing than standby. Claimants have to request standby. They can request standby when they file their weekly claim. If the employer wants to send in a list of employees, then that can be cross-referenced, but it's not done automatically. An employer can send in a list. Let's say recently we've gotten a list of 1,000 employees. Well, we can't go through each one of those employees to see if they've already filed a claim. So what we try to do is we try to cross-reference when those other employees file an unemployment claim and request standby. So
Okay.
does that help?
Yes.
Or did I make it more confusing? I apologize.
Maybe both.
Okay.
This is, a process that I think we're all still trying to navigate, including ESD as there's new emergency rules. So you mentioned the separation reasons. I will share this chart that you shared with me earlier. Could you just walk
It's not official yet, just so you know.
This is just some guidance. Could you just give us some information, walk us through these separation reasons and what they might mean?
Okay. Currently working full-time, that's kind of self-explanatory. You're opening up a claim in anticipation that you might not be working full-time again. So realistically,
and is full-time 36 hours?
40.
40 hours.
We consider it 40 hours, right? So if you are currently working full-time, most people just do it to open up a claim and have that weekly benefit amount locked in, because as you come to the end of calendar quarters, the amount they might be eligible for changes in some cases, because in some quarters you worked more than others. So if you were to go online and find out what your weekly benefit amount was now, or estimated what your weekly benefit amount was now versus what it's going to be April 1st, or I'm sorry, change of quarter is on April 5th, that could make a difference on whether you want to file now or whether you want to file later. So some people, their weekly benefit amount and their maximum amount that they're going to receive is higher now. So even though they're currently working full-time, they'll go ahead and open up an unemployment claim. And then when they do get their hours reduced later, they don't have to worry about having the lower amount that might be the next quarter. The reverse is true also. So if you're currently working full-time, you can open up your claim. If you choose to file weekly claims at that point, you must report all hours of work and earnings for that week. And if you're working full-time, then there's really no need for standby because you're already working.
Okay.
Currently working part-time, those are the people who were not hired for full-time work, but have always worked part-time. So they always work less than full-time. Generally speaking, those employees still need to be making an active search for work, but on the emergency rules, they are standby eligible. And after I sent you this copy this morning, I made some other adjustments to it, so it doesn't reflect that in the notes.
Okay.
All right, so the currently working reduced hours, partially employed, that's what I was talking about earlier, where you had to have been hired to work 40 hours a week, but your hours have been reduced to no less than 16 per week. In any week that you report less than 16 hours of work and earnings, then it triggers you back into needing to do a work search. Because this particular separation reason doesn't make you do a work search unless you go below 16 hours. Standby is not necessary. But if you're working 16 or more hours a week, you don't have to look for work in addition to doing your work, in addition to working. Fired are those people who were let go for some kind of disciplinary reason. It's not the same as laid off, because when you're fired, it's more like there was work for you to do, you just weren't doing it right. or enough of it, or meeting production, or you did something wrong. Those people who were fired are not eligible for standby, and we will gather other reasons for the reason for being let go in that type of scenario. Laid off, these are when the business closes, the business slows down, there's not enough work for everybody. It can include reducing part-time workers to even lower number of hours. If you look on under the notes, there's a list of the sub-reasons required, and in most cases, it's the business closed or temporarily, permanently, or there was just not enough hours. Leave of absence, that is generally used for medical reasons. So if I have a broken leg and I'm a server in a restaurant, I can't exactly do my job. So I need to be on a leave of absence. And it's a mutual agreement between myself and my employer that I'm going to be off for a certain period of time and I'm guaranteed my job back as a server. You're not eligible for standby during that time, and you do need to look for work that you are eligible to do. Quit, just like the fire, that has different reasons associated with it. An employee is the one who makes the decision to leave, or for some reason is unable to continue working, and they're not generally expected to return to work. And you are not eligible for standby if you quit your job. There was some other things on that chart if you wanted me to talk about that. Another page. There we go. We've already talked about shared work. And I did want to touch on the strike lockout thing, because we've had an influx of people who think because their business closed, they are locked out. And so many people have chosen this as a separation reason. This particular reason is only if you are on strike from your employer, or as part of a collective bargaining agreement, your employer locked you out. This is not for the general, my business is closed, or my employer had to close their doors for a period of time. These are just for labor dispute type things. And if you as an employer, or if there are employees on the call too, I saw the poll. If you chose strike or lockout, please return the paperwork as soon as possible. You cannot answer this one in e-services. You have to either fax or mail in the information, because this will hold up your unemployment payment if you chose the wrong reason for separation. So if you're an employer out there who's gotten one of these that said strike or lockout, please send it back so that we can take care of your employee. Suspended is just like fired, except your employer is holding on to your job for you, and they're not eligible for standby also. And then temporarily out of work to attend mandatory apprenticeship training. Those are for those union members who have to, in order to fulfill their requirements of their union, they have to attend monthly or every couple of months training in order to keep their apprenticeship going.
So with standby, if someone applies and is approved for standby, and then they work 5 hours a week, for example, does that then make them ineligible for the standby program?
If they were approved for standby, no, that they can still be eligible for standby, even if they're working 5 hours a week, but they have to have requested it. Standby can cover you while you're partially employed.
Great.
If
so
you fall into that part-time worker,
it before, and then when they're filing weekly.
Yes, they won't be asked the work search question, even if they report 5 hours of work during the week. It's when you get up until the full-time that it just kind of takes away that week, and it stays in your pot of standby weeks.
Great. So there's a question. I'm confused as to what was explained earlier. So when we file for standby and get approved already, do you need anything from the employer, or do they send, does ESD send something to be submitted?
So you get informed in two different ways. If your employee reported it as laid off, then it will come on your request for separation information that you can request standby. Now, if they have requested standby themselves, the employee has requested standby themselves and they were allowed or denied, the employer should get a letter that says this person was allowed or denied. I'm sorry, I misspoke. When an employee requests standby, the employer will get a confirmation of standby letter, and it will say this person has requested standby for these dates. If you, as the employer, say that's okay with me, you don't have to respond to that employer standby confirmation. If you do want to change the dates, or let's say you never intended on bringing this person back, you don't want them on standby, you can write that on there as well and send that back. Because standby is only, like I said, meant for people who are intending to go back to work for that employer.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
If employees use PTO, for example, in advance, do they just extend their standby date? So their first initial eligibility would be after they exhaust that PTO?
So PTO time needs to be reported on the weekly claim if they are going to file weeks that coincide with it. So if I'm taking 2 days of PTO this week and collecting unemployment for the rest of the week, that PTO, the hours and earnings that you would normally be getting paid for, is reportable and deductible from your weekly benefit amount. Now, standby would basically cover you so you wouldn't have to look for work during those weeks that we are paying, during those days that we are paying unemployment. So even if you're eligible for $1 of unemployment benefits, you would normally have to seek work unless you are on standby. So some people are choosing to use all of their PTO before they even file an unemployment claim.
Mm-hmm.
Some people choose to spread it out so they get a little bit more, because unemployment only pays a portion of your regular salary. It pays about 50 to 60% depending on how much you earn during your base year. So some people will choose to get their full pay for however many days they're getting their PTO and then have that deducted from their weekly benefit amount.
Can someone on standby make and sell things on their own, not through the business, but if an employee is making their own jewelry, for example,
right,
selling it?
Yes, that is considered self-employment. And if somebody is on unemployment benefits, we do have to look at any work that you do as a self-employed individual. We look at whether the business is something that you can do while you're working full-time or looking for work full-time. You have to be willing to, in normal circumstances, let me just say that, you have to be willing, able, and actively seeking work for an employer other than yourself while you're collecting unemployment benefits. Now, if you're on standby and a self-employed person, as long as you are willing, able, and ready to go back to work for your employer for anything that they might need from you while you're on standby, you can. You have to report your earnings for any money that you make as a self-employed individual while you're collecting unemployment. It is deductible from your unemployment benefits.
Can employers issue bonuses to employees while they're on unemployment?
That's a really tricky question because it depends on whether it's applicable to a week that they're filing benefits.
Okay, so if they filed benefits and in the same week an employer paid them a bonus
that was applicable to that week, yes,
Okay.
then it's deductible from unemployment.
Okay.
I know a lot of employers are trying to help make up the difference between unemployment and people's regular salaries, but when they do that, that money still has to be deducted from the weekly benefit amount. So it's kind of a a cycle that doesn't seem to help as much as you want it to.
Yeah, kind of a catch-22 there.
It is.
So 1099 employees, well, 1099 contractors are not eligible for unemployment security benefits at this time, correct?
Not necessarily. Basically, just because somebody is a 1099 employee doesn't mean they're not an employee of the company. It may just mean that the employer wasn't reporting taxes on them when they actually should have been.
Okay.
There's a process that we have to go through to determine whether or not somebody is actually an employee or whether they are self-employed. And so a lot of people will think they're not eligible just because they're self-employed, but if because they're a 1099 contract employee. But if the employer has direction and control over the work that they do, they may actually be an employee instead of a contract worker. And so that's a process that has to be requested. So
what advice would you give to folks that are going through the system right now and getting error messages or, not able to get through? Is it a function of timing because there's so many applications right now? What advice do you have?
Well, e-service is open 24/7. You should be able to file your claim at any time. If you're having problems getting through on e-services because there's a high volume of claims coming in, then I would suggest doing it in off hours, outside of normal hours of business, or so be it not the waking hours, the normal people's waking hours. But the claim centers are actually going to be opening up, I believe, starting this week, extended hours. I think they are starting at 7 a.m. and open until 6 p.m. Monday through Friday, and they are also going to be open on Saturday. So if you're having problems getting in by phone, just keep trying. They also have what's called virtual hold available. It's kind of like when Comcast says, can we put you on, can we call you back? It's the same type of principle where they'll take your phone number and they will give you a time frame that they'll call you back. So keep trying. If you're trying by phone, keep trying at different hours if you're trying to apply through e-services. There is currently no place where you can walk in and file a claim in person.
Okay. I have a comment from an individual talking about just not being able to get through,
Mm-hmm.
And e-services not responding. What can folks do if they're experiencing that? Is there some way to escalate things, or is it just a function of keep trying? There's a lot of volume right now.
Right now, like I don't know if I mentioned last week, we normally in a week will get anywhere from 5,000 to 8,000 brand new unemployment claim applications. Last week alone, we got over 100,000.
Wow.
So you're competing with all these other people who are going through the same thing you are. So the best advice I can tell you is to keep trying to get through. I know that if you have a SAW account with any agency in the state of Washington, you can use that SAW account to apply to open up your e-services account with unemployment. If you're having problems establishing a SAW account, there's a phone number that pops up if it doesn't let you through, and you need to contact them because it's probably an identity question. The answers to the questions weren't what the system was expecting. So please keep trying. That's all I can really say at this point, is just keep trying.
Great. Well, we have a lot of open questions. Thank you everyone for submitting questions. We will not be able to get to all of them. However, you do have my commitment that we will go through these questions and post them on the chamber website or another resource and let that be known. If you have a specific question, I will be taking this entire chat panel to address them, but you can send other questions to info at businesshealthtrust.com. And I just sent that via chat with everyone, all attendees right now as well, so that you have that. And we will work our best with ESD to get some resources together and to send out some of the materials that we looked at today, as well as some that Chris was talking about. I think one last question that I have for you, Chris, is do people need to file each week if they are on partial or shared work programs?
Yes, it's the only way you're going to get paid is by filing your weekly claim, because we pay weekly.
Great.
You have to establish that you met the requirements for the previous week in order to get paid for that that particular week.
Great. And since we do have a few more minutes, I will try to get through just maybe one or two more questions. What if you have multiple employers and work as a temporary employee?
You would still report your work and earnings for each employer, because it'll ask you if you worked for more than one employer, and you would say yes, and then add both employers in there and the hours and earnings you earned for each employer. If for some reason you stop working for one of those employers, you're going to need to report the reason that you stopped working for one of those, for that employer. Anytime you stop working for an employer, you have to report the reason why.
And for separation reasons, as people are going through this process, the laid off laid off classification seems like it's going to apply to a lot of people right now.
It does.
For temporary closure, company closed temporarily, on call or standby with my employer, are some of those sub reasons there. Is that pretty accurate?
Yes, I would, unless you're on call with an employer, I probably wouldn't use the on call or on standby with my employer. It doesn't really do a whole lot. It would be better probably to use either other reason not listed or business closed, temporarily closed, things like that.
Okay. And if people are selecting laid off and applying for standby, even if they're working, 2-4 hours a week, very reduced schedules?
Yes.
Okay. Great. Well, I thank you again for your time. I know everyone on the call, this was a lot of information. We will be sending out a summary. We will be sending out answers to additional questions that were asked and additional ones that might come in, and working closely with employment security. We realize this is a very unprecedented time for everything, and appreciate that everyone took the time today to learn a little bit about what the programs look like and what options might be, and to help us really understand what resources we can be pushing out to all of those on the phone and to the employer members that we serve. Thank you very much again to the Chamber, Seattle Chamber of Commerce, who has been a very vocal advocate for employers and employees in this time. And thank you for their continued work there. Thank you all. I will keep the chat function open for a while, so if you have additional questions, please feel free to type them in, or you can email info@businesshealthtrust.com. And just a reminder, the Chamber team, so the email that you got to access this webinar, will be sending out a link to a summary and additional resources. Thank you very much.
Thank you.